What does Adolf Eichmann say in connection with all those witnesses? Bislitseni is lying. Hess is the very emblem of accuracy, as he said himself. He has no reason to shift the blame onto Eichmann. He is a liar. Wissenmayer is a liar. Here I am ready to join him. Mildner, his very friend, he met him in the Argentine. I quoted to court this part of his statement. He too is a liar. 6, his witness is also a liar. President of court, is it the same Mildner, the one who was in Denmark earlier? Attorney General, yes, it is the same Mildner. And together with Sassen and Eichmann, they met in the Argentine, and there they tried to clarify the assignments and tasks which Eichmann had to carry out. His own witness 6, as I said before, is a liar. Becher is a liar. Morgan of the SS is a liar. Helm is a liar. His own witness, Winkelmann, is a liar. All of them a pack of liars. He is the only one speaking the whole truth. He believes that he can go back on his words he made to the police in his statement. He says to the court, see, when I testified at the police, I took upon myself the arrest of Grieber, and that just proves, and in court it was proved that I did not arrest him at all. That is, that I did not remember well and was ready to take blame upon myself. But he goes on to speak in details. And the statement, pages 1636 and 1635, 2008, the directives he issued to arrest Dr. Grieber. And when Dr. Grieber came to court, not knowing who brought about his arrest, but that some police post implemented Eichmann's orders and arrested him, he finds an excellent excuse. Look, I have put myself in the light of carrying this blame while I myself did not arrest him. And I was carrying this blame on my conscience all those years whilst my hands were clean. And he's even prepared to go further. He described before Sassen, in the part corrected in his own hand, the competence he had at the time, his general authority, his status at the time. And when he is asked, he says, I realized from the documents shown to me here in court that I was mistaken. Your Honors, he needs documents in order to describe what his task, his rank, his authority, his competence was at the time. This he wants to collect from documents in the hands of the prosecution, fragments of documents. He, in the Argentine, bears with pride the title Ex-Obersturmbannführer. He does not know what his authority was and how far his orders would reach and would be implemented. He claimed that he was mistaken. The court will remember that when I asked him to read a quotation from the Sassen memoirs, right here on the spot, in this very cell, twice Once he changed the quotation when instead of reading the chief of the Sicherheitspolizei and the Reichsführer of the SS, and this at session 102, pages 16-17, and the correction was in his own handwriting. And here, right on the spot, without giving it a second thought, in the ears of the court, he corrects whilst reading a statement made by him. And once again, when there is an erasing, he introduces the little word no, changing the sense of the whole quotation. But how these things are done, right on the spot. And here, Your Honours, the central matter in order to weigh the evidence and appreciate the probative value of all I brought to court. He who can withstand the cross-examination so well and try to writhe and extricate himself, to react the way the accused did react, and overcome or try to overcome any obstacle, this is not a small man, not a very insignificant screw in this big machine. This is a man of serious and considerable intelligence. Of course, he cannot come out of it reasonably and intelligently out of a network of proof and evidence against him. Therefore, he must contradict himself from time to time. Therefore, he must give excuses which have no founding and are baseless. But his stature and his intelligence, this we saw after all the cross-examination. Here we realized a man who, in answer to questions put by the court and in cross-examination, observes, answers not to the point, but finds an excuse out of his sleeve, cunningly, cleverly, and reveals the real type and ability, efficiency of finding his whereabouts immediately.
And what he showed us in regard to his wonderful memory, also the very essence of his appearance here, the very essence of what he said in the witness box. Show him as a man who is certainly not the one who had been presented by him as a little cog in the big machine. This is not the personality we have seen here. He said, of course, that he was not promoted in rank because Miller thought that he would have difficulties with other department heads. But his position had increased. New tasks were entrusted to him all the time, and his personal status, which is the essential thing here, within the whole administrative machine, did not depend on the rank, but on the possibility and faculty to hold sway over matters, and this is what he knew full well. He was endeavoring to tell you, Your Honors, that he was not an anti-Semite at all. Of course, this is one of the absurdities one has to reach when one is endeavoring to say that one did everything in accordance with orders, reluctantly and not out of faith. Dr. Grieber already told us that National Socialism with people like this was connected with inveterate anti-Semitism and boundless hatred of Israel, of the people of Israel. And you see, Your Honors, the style he is resorting to. Then and in the Argentine. Let's assume that he has to frustrate the efforts of the Swedes for rescuing the Jews. Just in support of this claim, let us assume for a moment that Miller told him, write this letter, that the Norwegian Jews should not be helped, write that they should not grant Swedish citizenship to some dozen of people who wanted to come out of the slaughtering house. But the style he is using, the language he resorts to, the way he frames these thoughts in regard to anyone who is trying to help Jews, how he writes about Raoul Wallenberg, the Jewish dog. This is what he says. I'm going to liquidate him. This is what he says.
President of Court, I believe this was verbal, not written, was it?
This is written in Kastner report. This is about what the Swedish legation was complaining in Berlin, and the foreign ministry did not deny it at all. They said that the words were written in the heat of the moment. What did Wallenberg try? He was trying to save some Jews from his claws. That is what he was trying to do. He was trying to extricate people from the grip of death. This is the Jewish dog, as he says. I'm going to shoot him dead. This is what he says. And when Lesnar, the man about whom Dr. Gruber says, who from time to time would listen to him occasionally and would help, and he tried to help Lesnar in his denazification trial. Here, this man here still wants to accuse Lesnar and to put him among the extreme Nazis like himself, as it transpires from the relevant document. This document describes Eichmann as one of the greatest Jew-baiters, who was not ready to reconcile even to the compromise Hitler wanted to consider, that the Jews who were once upon a time serving in the German army would be released from the horrid duty of seeing their parents killed. Reischauer, however, or Adolf Eichmann, wouldn't be ready to reconcile to this particular compromise.
Haj Amin al-Husseini
Al-Husseini was the man who saw in Eichmann a precious gem. Of course, the one who was looking forward to carnage in this country, to a bloodbath. Here, obviously, his heart would warm to the greatest Jewish hangman in history. And Eichmann, in his department, is receiving some of the Mufti's trusted friends, and among others, one of his most important emissaries. What all this means, all this was quite certain. After the war and after the victory of Germany, destruction would extend over the entire world. Mufti himself was requesting the help and assistance of a man like Eichmann here, so that he could assist him, so that he could help him in this country to slaughter Jews in Jaffa and Jerusalem in order to finish the work which was started here in the riots in 1926 and 1931. And Eichmann didn't even deny it at all. He said there was something of the sort, there is no doubt about it, only he doesn't remember whether Vizliceni was the man who was maintaining contacts with Mufti or somebody else. Though Vizliceni says that this proposal to be a counselor of Mufti in a palace in occupied Palestine was entrusted to him. But this Eichmann doesn't remember. Wherever they set foot, immediately death to Jews would follow suit. As soon as the Africa Corps arrived in northern Africa, immediately the persecutions of Tunisian Jews were ushered in, and immediately their deportations began. Show Eichmann some Jews hiding somewhere in faraway places. In Monaco, for example. Let him only be informed that there were some Jews in Liechtenstein. The octopus of his activities would spread its feelers all over the place to track those that were hiding. And even in Argentina, when he is already released from his oath, as he told you here, we know what he is writing about, a man who dared to criticize the Führer. What derogative language he is resorting to in describing this man. A man who thinks after a certain time that Hitler blundered in declaring war. What is Eichmann's reaction to all this? He remained faithful to his Führer up to the very end, after the Führer's demise. Such a man ought to be flayed, he said. Of course, with such people we had to lose the war. This is what Eichmann says in Argentina. And National Socialist, the poisonous and venomous National Socialism, is emanating from every word he writes, from every marginal note he jots down. When we asked him about it, he didn't deny that he wrote these remarks. He said that this is a purely private matter. I don't know how you got it. I did not lend this book to anyone, as far as I remember. This is what annoyed him, that the book which he didn't lend to anyone had fallen into the hands of an editorial office of a newspaper, and that this newspaper published it, inclusive of all the little marginal notes he jotted down. And what does he write in file 17? When he says that he wrote it quietly, enjoying serenity and peace of mind in Argentina somewhere. What does he write then? He writes about the typical Jewish tricks and subterfuges. This is what he writes when he found out that Krume was to stand trial in Germany. And what does he say? And he admits it. These were the passages about which there was no discussion whatsoever. What does he say then when he finds out that some Jews had extricated themselves from his claws in Hungary? What he writes about it in Argentina in 1957. He says, if this is the case, I am not responsible for the fact that the Hungarians are groaning under the yoke of Jewish secret police. Vyslitseny and Krume are to be blamed for the fact that the Jews are still there and the Jews are riding roughshod over the Hungarian population. If this is how he spoke in Argentina 12 years after the end of the war, is there any doubt whatsoever that what Vyslitseny wrote about him and about the statement of joyous jump into the pit, is there any doubt about its being true? There are two things we've heard. Eichmann says that in this twilight of gods, towards the end of the war, he gathered his soldiers saying, this is the end. This war took the toll of 5 million lives. The foes and the Germans had been killed, but the end had come, and now I'm ready to jump into the grave. This is one version, and he says that he spoke about 5 million of foes of the Reich. This is his version, Your Honors. Apart from the fact, of course, that many more fighters of peace were killed. More than 3 times as many had fallen on the battlefield in order to fight the Nazi spectre, the Nazi incubus. But let's say that this is correct. But what enemies could he have? What enemies could he speak about when he conversed with his subordinates? In what front was he active? What foe did he doom to destruction? What enemy did he smite root and branch? He was fighting only one enemy, and he said it quite clearly. He was only destroying the Jew, he and his men. And even if the last time he wants to convey to his men some sort of encouragement, some sort of summing up, though we have lost, but our enemies too went with us to the grave. He has no other enemies then but the only enemy, the Jewish one. Those were the enemies he was fighting against. He said he had made the statement. He expressed it here in the cross-examination. Here he said that he spoke about Jews, about 5 million Jews. He spoke twice about them. For the first time, the court showed him that passage from T43, and for the second time I saw him, therefore, said passage about 5 million Jews that he spoke about. But here he is endeavoring to convince you that he spoke out of regret and pity with regard to his enemies. If we compare these two versions, his statement about 5 million people killed here, the 5 million Jews, and if we compare it with Vislitseni's testimony, according to which Eichmann told Vislitseni, I don't care a hang, I did my job. If he lost the war, I personally had not lost my war, and I'll jump into the pit with joy if I know that I dragged with me 5 million Jews. This is what he said. He was not fighting, not against the Soviet army nor against the Western allies. He wouldn't consign one shot against those enemies. He was not working in any of the German battlefronts. The Reichsfeinde, the foes of the Reich, he was entitled to speak about, were Jews and only Jews. And 6 million people who were on his conscience, as he pointed it out to Grell, were Jews. Perhaps he occasionally takes on his conscience the victims of the Eichmann-Gruppen, and sometimes he takes them out of his personal account. Therefore the figure hovers between 5 million and 6 million, in accordance with the fluctuations of his conscience. And to Hettel he said it quite clearly, without mincing matters. We had killed 6 million Jews. He spoke about it with joy and not regret. He only expressed with regret one thing when he spoke to Zassin in his conclusive remarks. When he explained things to Zassin, why he hadn't finished his work up to the hilt, why Jews had still been left alive. There, where he repents. This is where he repents. Now he says one must have been insane to have said those things, that one regrets that not all the Jews have been killed. Your honors, we have seen already that people express regret, and I wouldn't be surprised at the fact that Eichmann might regret his conversations with Zassin, that he let his tongue run away with him to such an extent. He asked him not to publish certain things during his lifetime. But these were the words flowing straight from his heart. These were the cogitations enshrined in the form of document. And when he comes here and pays lip service to his indignation at crime, this is what he is saying when he was pressed to call a spade, then it is nothing short of lip service, your honors. Up to this very moment, he doesn't think that he has perpetrated crime. He knew that this was running counter to any conception of morals. He knew very well that he was upsetting time-hallowed principles, but he is proud of the fact that he was serving the Führer and his fatherland in ridding it one way or another of Jews.
Spared.
This horror which had fallen on Europe The age of darkness that fell on Europe when Hitler seized power has some brighter lights. And the Jewish people will never forget those who helped them, as it will never forget its foes. Up to this very day, we are lauding the memory of the former Persian King Cyrus, who enabled the exiles to come back to their country, and we shall always remember those who helped to rescue the children of Israel. We shall never forget the nobility of the Danish people, the entire Danish people, which tried its utmost to rescue the Jews from Denmark. We will never forget the nobility of the Danish king and the Danish underground, which were endeavoring to help the Jews. We shall never forget the Belgians and the Belgian underground, Norway and the Norwegian underground, which smuggled the Jews into Sweden at the risk of their lives. We shall never forget the Swedes for having extended refuge to the Jews, and we shall never forget Raoul Wallenberg, who had saved thousands of Jews from the jaws of death in Hungary. We shall never forget the French resistance that saved the Jews, and rescued them wherever they could. We shall never forget the Dutch people for having identified themselves with the Jews and put on the Jewish badges. The strike they declared in order to identify themselves with the Jewish ordeal. We shall never forget the church in Holland and its noble activities. The church which expressed quite clearly and outspokenly its identifying itself as the Jews. We shall never forget the Italians who tried to put spokes in the wheels of the evil plans of Mussolini. We shall never forget the convents and monasteries in Italy and the rank and file of the Italian nation, of whom so many as rallied round the persecuted Jews. We shall not forget those in Poland who helped us, risking their own lives, jeopardizing their own safety, risking their lives and dooming themselves to destruction. There was Polish underground. There were little men and women, the small fry that helped the Jews at the risk of their own lives. We heard about such people in Lithuania. We know, for instance, about mothers who would, over the fence, hand their babies to Lithuanian peasant women. We heard about Dr. Gruber and his friends within Germany itself. We heard about their supreme and unflinching effort, their unswerving determination at the risk of their own lives to help and rescue. We heard about people who believed in man and believed in loving their neighbors. They were within Germany itself, the small fry, as Gruber himself pointed out. People who formed the underground movement, whose one of the exalted goals it was to save the Jews. We shall be able to remember those who helped and those who are good in this ocean of evil and hideousness. Their names will always be engraved in our memory, and if it please the court, I shall read to you a few words written by a Gentile on this story. A few poems which he composed and which are to be found in Kogan's book on the SS. They were translated into Hebrew at my request by Mr. Arias of Ner and into English by Mr. Yosef Rosen. This is what he said.
My heart I had opened to love this country. My messengers went there again and again. Countless the shapes I took on. Craving entry, none did you recognize. All was in vain. At night, a pale Hebrew, I knocked at your gate. Pursued, I sought refuge. My shoes were torn out. You called executioners, craftsmen of hate, and thought you were serving God, doing Him proud. I came as an old, frightened, dim-witted creature, speechless with anguish, dumb in her cry, but you had your eyes on the race of the future, and just for my ashes one could apply. In eastern lands, as an orphan I wandered. I knelt at your feet and I begged for some bread, but fearful, on future vengeance you pondered, and just shrugged your shoulders and wished I were dead. I have been your prisoner, dragged to forced labor, was sold into slavery, whipped, made to bow. Your eyes you averted, you liked not the flavor. I came here to judge you. You will know me now.
Not bad. Rosen.
And Your Honors, here too we have witnessed the standing of the Jewish people, beaten, alone, surrounded by walls of hatred, surrounded by Landknechts, rising to deeds of heroism all over Europe. And in all countries. The uprising, partisans, the Jewish underground, the underground in Poland, the one we heard about in Hungary, and this from Rosenberg, organizing the escape. And these too, those who went to serve and free and liberalize, they said, I believe until the very end that this death was not in vain.
If you ask me, I think it's finished.
there is no consolation.
That the third of the nation has fallen. But there is solace in the fact that the Jews knew how to face the enemy with dignity and pride. And they said in those days, this is our last road. The clouds of despair had hidden the light of despair, but the time will come when a bright moment will loom before us, before those who will survive. And in conclusion of this chapter, Your Honors, I shall recall something which I omitted perhaps in the first chapter, namely the great of the people of this world, about the Yugoslavs. The Greeks, all those who cherished man in occupied countries of Europe, all those who struggled against the satanic forces of the conqueror in order to rescue men from the jaws of death.
No, this time this belongs to you.
And now I'm approaching the end, and I wish to make a few remarks. I was told that among the list of the satellite countries which later resisted and did not surrender Jews, although they had contributed to the crimes earlier, there is also Bulgaria, and I must mention this in order not to remain in their debt. And I wish to recall the German citizen Gloibe, who intervened on behalf of Jews, and his affidavit was submitted to you here. The horrible sight of the executions by the Einsatzgruppen is described there. I wish to mention this.
If so, then you should mention Romania as well.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm coming to that, to Romania.
I see.
It is true, Romania too, although Antonescu was first presented by Hitler as an example of a statesman who knows how to solve the Jewish problem, Romania did not surrender her Jews. It is true that Romanian Jews were saved in spite of all the intrigues and endeavors, and in spite of the deception and lying employed by Eichmann and his representative Richter in Bucharest. Eventually, in spite of a heavy catastrophe which struck the Jews of that country in the camps of Transnistria, a large part was saved. Scores of thousands died, but hundreds of thousands were rescued. And one more remark. with regard to the magazine Life and the articles which we showed to the accused during his interrogation, and this was shown to him in his interrogation at Bureau 06, I would request the court to note that first the accused made his comments about these articles, and later, when his comments grew in number, as he testified, as Superintendent Less testified here, he undertook to mark with agreed notations those passages about which he had reservations, and therefore those other passages bearing no markings must be regarded as being accepted by him without any reservations. Adolf Eichmann acted for the perpetration of these crimes with which he is charged in the most extreme and merciless way and the most brutal way conceivable. And although it does not matter too much from the point of view of his conviction, it can have an effect on another stage. And I would like the court to rule that he acted zealously, willingly, and lustfully to the very end. He did all that was required to do. And if there remain Jews in spite of everything, in spite of his endeavors, this is not to his credit. This is because of the advancement of the Soviet armies, which saved the remnants in the eastern countries, the few survivors, and on account of the advance of the Western allies from the other direction, where they could still save a few score thousand inmates of the camps. And those armies too, and the salvation which the Jewish remnants experienced will redound to their everlasting credit, and they deserve the gratitude of the Jewish nation for that. It was not Adolf Eichmann who caused this. He said, when he spoke to Zassen, I did not succeed in my mission to the last, and he apologized for that and said that they did not manage to stoke the stoves with all the Jews, to stoke the furnaces with everyone. Thus, Your Honors, we reviewed the revolution which the Nazis wanted to bring about in Europe and throughout the world, to set back the wheels of progress, to wipe off the face of the earth the achievements of progress, and to establish a blind obedience to a dictator as the supreme command. Like Attila the Hun, Hitler was the scourge. Attila bragged that wherever his horses had ever stood, no grass would ever grow. Adolf Hitler and his accomplices bragged about the brutality, the cruelty, and their capacity to kill a human being without a spark of mercy, to raise cities, exterminate nations, and liquidate states. Apparently, there is a limit to the number of people whom one individual can murder from the hate and the bloodthirstiness in his heart. But there is no limit to the number of people that can be killed from systematic, level-headed, cool decision of a categorical decision. and a categorical order. The Jewish people, to its great tragedy, was the first victim, although there are many signs that if they had been victorious, the Jews would not have been the last victim. The Zamość deportations, Slovenia, they testify to that. The fury rained down on the defenseless multitudes of the Jewish nation. They are gone, and they cannot be brought back to life. And in order to lament their death and their suffering, a new writer of the Chronicle of Lamentations has to come to lament to the nation, to that part of the nation which has been struck down. But there must be justice for what was perpetrated against them. And I am proud of the fact that days have come in which a citizen of Israel can speak the language of justice to an evildoer who was captured. Here in this state, one does not speak to these evil men pleadingly and beggingly. One does not beg for their mercy, and one does not have to bribe them. One does not flee from him, and there is no need to flee frightfully from one country to the other. Here law and justice prevail. And in the period of the returning of the exiles of Judea and Jerusalem, justice is being done here, and a trial takes place here for the blood of the just that was spilled, as the prophet Joel had foretold. And I again ask you, O judges of Israel, render a just and truthful verdict.
President of Court.
Actions performed in the course of this which is charged here as being a crime.
President of Court, thank you, Mr. Hausner. The coming session is on Monday morning at 8:30, and we shall be listening to the summing up by the Counsel for the Defense.
הספר הזה